Okay, I'm going to keep pushing it on, even though you're standing up, some of you, because we need to talk about human beings again, and why so often when we look at the travel industry, is the human aspect often a topic that gets relegated to being an afterthought. It's an issue that I have, and it's frequently the case whenever I do conferences, that we talk about the workforce, people, right at the end. And I think we're talking about it here, which is good, but it should really be high up on our priorities. And I think what happens is the industry is, when it lobbies governments for to look at the travel industry and its concerns, it constantly quotes 1 in 12 people work in tourism and hospitality. But guess what? They don't actually think about those people as individuals. They don't treat, yes, they're useful as stats, but I don't think the industry cares enough. And it is something that is being recognized more and more. But up until now anyway, it's a secondary issue. Because the fact is, this industry is vulnerable to human trafficking. It's vulnerable to issues of diversity, of inequality, and industry perception issues, the image of the industry. Not to mention the actual shortfall of people working in the industry. It's a huge problem. So, we're going to address that with our panelists now. And to open, I want to welcome, before we get to that, I want to welcome Marianne Gels-Fortuny, who is the head of unit, Industries, Forest, Agriculture, Construction, and Tourism for the International Labour Organization. Marianne Gels.
Thank you so much, Rajan. I like the music. I think that we should introduce this music thing in the UN system. I think that the meetings would be more lively. So earlier this week, I heard the mayor of Sevilla saying that Sevilla is the most beautiful city in the world. So I want to say that I work for the UN agency that has the most beautiful mandate, which is basically the promotion of social justice. The ILO was founded in 1919. It's the oldest UN agency. It was after the First World War with the Treaty of Versailles, basically based that universal and lasting peace can only be achieved through social justice. And still the mandate, we open the news, it's more relevant than ever. Also, Nobel Peace Prize in 1969, because of all the regulations we developed on working conditions. If we can take holidays and travel, it's because of the ILO. If we work 40 hours a week, it's because of the ILO. So let me start by just giving an overall of the employment scenario for this year and projections for next year, which is pretty grim. According to ILO estimates, employment growth, global employment growth in 2023 will be only like 1%, and this is much lower than in the last year. We calculate that young people have 3 times higher unemployment rates than their older counterparts, and the majority of people, the vast majority of people that work in the world, they work in the informal economy with absolutely no protection. And let alone then also that about 70% of those that work, they are poor. They live in less than $1.9 a day. That's 7% of employed population. But what's the good news about the tourism industry? The good news basically is as we say, the incredible employment generation potential that it has. Over 230 million workers, so approximately 7% of the world population work in tourism. However, still, a lot of them informally, and the majority of workers are in small and medium-sized enterprise, very, very small companies. However, as Rajan was saying, we calculate that 1 out of 10 jobs in the industry, 1 out of 10 jobs worldwide are created in tourism, and even 1 out of 4 in industries related to the tourism sector. And one big characteristic about tourism, and it's a word that I heard it like a couple of times in this meeting, but not a lot, but it's about the resilience, how resilient this industry is. And very much the resilience of the industry is related to how resilient also the workforce is. And that's a big topic. Next week I'm invited in the OECD to talk about resilience, but they want to know about how do we make the workforce, the tourism workforce, more and more resilient. So Rajan also was mentioning about the shortfall, the labor market shortages that we talk about in the industry, that basically it's difficult to find, to retain skilled workers. What are the reasons? Some anecdotal evidence, some research that we did in the ILO in 7 countries, 7 developing countries. What did we find? That the training institutions, they cannot keep up, actually, the public training institutions, they cannot keep up with the sector's growth, or they don't exist. They also found out that a lot of governments, sometimes poor governments, they prioritize infrastructure development instead of investment in education and training for the industry. They also found out, of course, that the training curricula is outdated. It's it's out of fashion, let's say. And there is also a big gender divide in education and training for the industry. And this gender divide, when it comes to education and training, it translates in a gender divide in occupations, and it translates in the gender wage gap, basically that women earn less than men in the industry overall. They also found out that basically, of course, staff turnover is high, so basically enterprises struggle to retrain and to replenish the workforce, but also that the positions are not attractive enough, particularly for young people, and youth aspirations are changing. Young people aspire to more and more and better working conditions, better wages, etc. So it's important that when we talk about the skills deficit, that we talk about it in context. It's intertwined with other labor conditions, with other, as we call, decent work deficits. And what are these? Of course, the informality, the long working hours, in certain cases low wages, limited access in social protection to social security, occupational safety and health, discrimination, and the lack of an enabling environment for enterprises to grow, for the small enterprises to grow. And here, of course, I'm not talking about the big companies, I'm talking about the majority of the small and medium-sized enterprises that basically comprise the sector. Another thing, of course, that it's related to the image of the sector is, as you were mentioning also, Rajan, is the human rights violations that happen. And what's very important, that this is not the industry's fault. It's absolutely not the industry. This is because of poverty. It's because of social injustice. So, we need to tackle the root of these problems. But indeed, forced labor, human trafficking, sexual abuse, and exploitation of children, it's an issue that, and I know that the industry is working very much with governments and to tackle this, but they are unduly associated with tourism, but it's important to tackle them. And here is where the conventions, the ILO conventions that we call the fundamental principles and rights at work, which include forced labor and child labor conventions, it's important to enforce and to implement. So moving to, what are the solutions? And, in the ILO, in the UN, we like to do meetings and agree. We are a tripartite organization with employers, workers, and governments. We had the latest meeting on 2022 about recovery from the pandemic, and a bit these three parties agreed on the package of policies that are needed for the industry. Number one is, of course, skill development, to engage in diversified skill development and education and training, to support businesses, to support the small enterprises for an innovation and to develop these sustainable enterprises, to take advantage also of the potential of basically ecotourism that has. Emphasis was also made on occupational safety and health for workers, because that's an issue that also came very strong with the pandemic, and it's one of the good things that now it's in the forefront of the agenda. Access to social protection, tackle issues related to non-discrimination and equality, and also ensure a good work-life balance. So these were like the sort of the package of ideal messages that would need to be put in place for the industry. Another issue that was very much emphasized was the importance of intersectoral, interministerial cooperation and partnerships. The tourism industry, there are many related sectors, starting from the bottom of the supply chain of agricultural workers to other industries, to transport, etc. So this interministerial cooperation and international collaboration that has basically seen during the pandemic is very, very crucial. And finally, that basically all these partnerships, one thing that was emphasized and it's interesting is the word trust. And I think that it came in here in several panels, that basically building on all these different partnerships requires building trust, requires building compromise. And of course, this is what we do in the ILO with our 3 different parties, employers, business, and workers. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne Gills. Take a seat. And can I now please bring on stage the rest of the panel? Dr. Sasha Gill, who's the Vice President, Environment and Sustainability, CLEAR International. Hello, Sasha. Valentino Girotto, who is Senior Director, International Development at ICF. Hello. Feja Begovic, Chief of Party, Project Tourism, USAID in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and developing sustainable tourism. And Rika Jean-Francois, Commissioner, ITB Corporate Social Responsibility. Welcome, everyone. Marianne Gill, just 1 point on the nature of people who work in this industry. It's an industry that does not, on the whole, have regular hours. It's not 9 to 5. There's a lot of shift work. You travel a lot. It's inherently less stable, if you like, than other industries. Is that something that you are taking into account, you're aware of?
Absolutely. This is one point that I had written down and I didn't mention. But exactly, I mean, it has many forms of work, as we call it, diverse forms of employment. And there is nothing wrong about that per se. It's an issue that it needs to be properly regulated and properly managed. And here it's basically where governments have a key role to play to enforce regulations, building institutions, labor inspections, labor inspectors, they have a key role to play. There is nothing wrong with having diverse forms of work, but they need to be properly regulated.
Okay, so Sasha, cruise liners, you have got an issue with employee shortages, haven't you?
Absolutely, but if I may put this a little bit into perspective, it was very interesting what you said, Marianne. But when I look at workforce structure as such, we need to look a little bit how the industry is structured as such. And it's not the same issue or the same challenge for everybody. So if I look at the cruise line industry as such, we as CLEAR as such represent about 95% of the cruise industry. So in numbers, we are talking roughly about 400 ships on the ocean and roughly about 400 ships on the rivers. So you can think about 800 floating cities around the world. So just from a structural perspective. If we look at these numbers as well, we can also say that at any given time, we have about 225,000 people, staff at this point, on board of our ships traveling with us. And the challenge that we're running, and I've got a slide on that, if you don't mind, I can show that one. The challenge that we are having at the moment is that the industry itself has rebounded phenomenally. So if you go on this page here, you can see, if you look at the cruise destination comparison between 2019 and 2022, you can see in any given cruise destination, we have rebounded massively and exceeded our goals there. And that's the challenge. It's the success of the industry that's the challenge. So when you look at our ships, we operate our ships today. We are fully staffed on our ships as well. But when we look at the growth that's coming up until 2025, 2030, then put on top the sustainability as well, we need on one side, we need of course more staff, more line staff as well, which means workers that can do cooking, serving as well. So basic skills as such, but then also we need staff that is really technology affine, meaning that they can work with our new sustainability practices as well, with our new engines, our new technology as well. And there's a big comparison, a big difference between these two. One, we can train ourselves. the cooks, the chefs, right? We know how to do that. But when it comes to technology affineness and knowing precisely how to run these new engines, for example, that's something where we need institutions, university, to really take that education further.
And it's important to recognise that within the cruise industry, there's two very different types of jobs, really, aren't there? There's the seafarers, the people who actually, the captain, whoever. Then you've got the hospitality staff, and they're very different, aren't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. The hospitality staff as such, again, we've been in this business for a long time, so we know how to train them up. And we have stopped relying on purely on shoreside facilities to train staff. We actually started to have our own cooking schools, for example, as well, have our own training for waiters, for example, for housekeeping as well. We pretty much know how to do that. That's not really a big challenge anymore. When it comes to nautical staff or maritime staff, that's a completely different ballgame. Here we're talking about safety, you had that in the previous panel. Here we're talking about technology as such. Here we're talking about an education that takes years to gain as such. And that's something where we need to rely on local institutions and also the recruitment of these institutions in the first place to get somebody into that industry so we can then bring them on board of our ships as well.
Let's talk about the recruitment and the challenges that you have, the obstacles that you have to that. So why are you not getting enough people?
Why are we not getting any people? I think generally tourism as such has a bit of a challenge on this. And the interesting part is that in tourism, we compete against each other on that rather than competing against other sectors. And that comes very much with tourism as such, the image of tourism that it's the end game, right? You join tourism and that's it. But what we don't see is the skills that we teach somebody are very transferable. You can move on board a ship, for example, from the galley into the service as well, into management, into sales and marketing, all the way into the technology sector, into nautical staffing as well, or shoreside afterwards into human resources. So you can really move through the ranks. I myself, I'm a trained chef. That was my first job on board the ship, and today I'm not working there anymore. So you can see these steps are possible as such. But again, that's something that we have really failed to communicate. And because we have failed to communicate, we can see that other sectors outside of tourism are much, much more successful recruiting staff for their offices, for their businesses, for the services, which also operate global. So similar setup.
And there are some other kind of bureaucratic issues almost, aren't there, with particularly your industry in terms of going around the world and visas and those aspects, right?
That's a specific issue for us because all of our vessels as such operate worldwide. All of our staff comes from over 90 different nationalities, so we really have a complete mix of nationalities on board. And this has specific issues when it comes to visas. And it's less about the working visa on board, that's a different story. It's more about staff traveling to and from the ship. You saw this very much during the COVID time as such. People were stuck on the ship, but there they were stuck on the ship because of the pandemic. If you look today, what we see is we find it very difficult in some ports to actually invite our staff to travel to the ship and join the ship for their work contract and get off the ship again. And that's happening quite frequent. If you look at the river cruise industry, some of these contracts are 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. So you work 2 weeks on board and then you have 2 weeks off. On cruise vessels, you have contracts that are 2 months long, 3 months long, really depending. But it's rather frequent. So it's several times during the year where you travel to and from the ship. And for these, we need visas. We need Schengen visas. We need visas to get into the country and bring people on board as well. And of course, that's a burden for the staff member. It's a difficulty for us to do the logistics. And of course, it's difficult as well for the local governments to issue these visas as well. Because again, we're talking about any given time, 225,000 people who are on board of our ships and they travel around as well. So it's quite a significant number.
Okay, you raised image, by the way, and we're going to come back to that a lot, I think, in the rest of this conversation. Valentina, what work have you and ICF been doing in this area, and what are your biggest concerns? I know that social inclusion is a big aspect of what you're concerned about.
Yes, indeed, that's correct. Before answering the question on the work, perhaps I'll take a step back and think about the workforce that we're talking about, right? Because it's not an homogeneous group. And beyond the obvious difference in between men and women, there are a lot of other characteristics that should be taken into account and will directly or indirectly impact the possibility of accessing certain jobs or even the decision to consider certain jobs. And just to name a few, that could be age, race, disability, and sexual orientation, etc. And we heard a lot about bias in the panel just before from Kathy, and I think that here actually there are a lot of unconscious or conscious biases that are actually impacting these decisions that we don't often consider. I think that if I bring the example of physical disabilities, then everyone will be able to recognize barriers, physical ones, right? There is no ramp here, so a person on a wheelchair would not be able to actually be speaking here. Simple things, but actually we know that for women, for example, in order to access the tourism industry or there are a number of other considerations that often are at play. I'll give an example then of this. We know that actually women form up the majority of students in hospitality or tourism sector, but as soon as then we look at beyond the entry-level jobs, that changes dramatically. Actually, hospitality may be faring a bit better than other industries in Europe, but still we see that it's barely above 20% of senior managers that are actually women. And if we remove HR, we actually go at about 15 to 18%. And if we look at boards, it's even lower. And if we look at compounding these characteristics, I think that the stats, when they exist, because they often don't exist, is that it's maybe 1 in 30 women of color are actually in boards. And so we see that there is, so women are present, but clearly on feminized and lower skilled positions, and that's a major issue that needs to be addressed. And there's a lot that can be done, so that then goes to the examples of what we have been doing, supporting the private sector and the institutions, so the local governments.
Is that as true in the West, the developed West, if you like, as in developing countries?
Yeah, although actually I would say that there is even less data available. It's surprising how often disaggregated data does not exist around the world, which means that even policies that are designed are not addressing the actual issues. You don't have enough data in Europe. There is the the European Institute of Gender Equality that actually published this data saying there is no data out there in the hospitality and tourism sector on number of women and men in boards, and it's a matter of accountability. We have seen changes in the last 10 years in a number of industries, and I think that the tourism sector can follow on this. Because often actually the lessons that have been learned in other sectors can be applied to tourism as well very easily, and it's often a matter of simple steps and taking actions that are not followed up, right? So I think that we often hear talks about the overall workplace culture, the hiring practices, the policies that are put in place, and there is a lot of evidence that shows how having women in senior leadership actually drives cultures that value diversity, and also seeing a diverse leadership encourages more diverse workforce to also apply for those jobs, right? If you see someone that looks like us, we're more likely to say, I like to work there, why not, right? It's as simple as that. And even, I think, is the type, going and linking it with the job that, or the support that we provide. So often when we design a service for our customers, we go and ask the customers, what do they want? So that they will buy it, right? We want to sell, so we want to make sure that we're responding to a demand. But we don't do that when we're talking about our workforce or when we're talking about public policies. So it often starts about doing an assessment and realizing what the work conditions are for everyone. Because in the leadership, especially if there is not a lot of leadership, they're not going to be able to voice that, right? And so recognizing what can be done to improve and retain this stuff, because there's so much of an issue in terms of getting people to stay in seasonality. There are a lot of issues in the tourism. But if you actually listen to what are the barriers, you then might be able to answer. And sometimes it's simple saying, well, having better work-life balances or allowing more flexibility, communication about those other opportunities, and it's often linked with upskilling as well. Often that can be linked in the work that we do. We try and combine that in our policy support to local governments. I work mostly in developing countries, and therefore there is a strong requirement of making sure that growth strategies and policies are actually directly addressing the sustainability matter. Maybe I'll leave that for another for another question. And with gender equality and inclusion, and making sure that those go hand in hand. An example that has also been presented by my colleague Ripon yesterday morning in the urban space is also that I've been working in Nepal since 2019 on a project that is supported by the UK government in improving urban policies and making sure that the cities are more livable for the citizens while supporting investment opportunities in green infrastructures as well. And Pokhara, if some of you in the audience have been to Nepal, know that it's the Futa di Annapurna. You have gone there. If you are going on a trek, everyone has to go through it. We were asking the local government, what is your long-term vision? What do you want to achieve? And obviously, it's strictly intertwined with tourism. It cannot be, right? Tourism is what brings thousands of people every year to Pokhara. And so we've been supporting them, developing a vision and for a sustainable tourism action plan and identifying investments that then, luckily enough, the Asian Development Bank and other development partners will be taken forward as well to implement. But so it's possible to look at what are the needs, how to respond to them, and combine them also with the workforce. So there's a concrete example of Pokhara has tens of lakes, and one of the challenges that we have, we've heard it yesterday, it's actually getting people to stay in Pokhara. Everyone lives and goes up the mountains and spend more money there as well, right? That's what it's a destination issue. Trying to do that in a more sustainable way has meant for us to develop a cycle route that was linking nine of those lakes and offering an opportunity for tourists to actually then spend more time visiting the beauty that is natural resources that they have, and creating opportunities for the communities around the area, and especially women, therefore, that could go from hospitality to restaurants, etc.
I want to return to you and talk about how we can counter issues like the ones you were suggesting, casualization, the casual nature of this industry as well. How do we deal with that? Ageism, maternity leave, all these things, which I suspect the tourism industry is not brilliant on the whole, but let's see if it's changing. Feja, we have with you, we have a case study in a way, because we have a country that's relatively new to tourism. So can you explain or tell us more about your human resources work in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in tourism?
Of course, thank you, Rajan. So we are a small country and just basically developing tourism from scratch. We don't have big numbers to show, and we're not a really well-known destination, so we have time to do things properly. And this tourism development project that I'm working on, that is funded by USAID, is to some extent compensating the absence of a national ministry of tourism and the absence of a national tourism board. So we have to deal with some things related to tourism development, one of those things being the workforce development. And we started in 2020, realized that it's the worst possible time to start because there is no tourism at the moment, and most of the workforce has been laid off. So what do you do in this situation, knowing that hopefully very soon the times will change and that we will have to have the labor that is skilled and trained and able to jump into this situation? So we developed several fronts, knowing that very soon, and this is now the time, this year is a record year for Bosnia and Herzegovina. We've exceeded the numbers from 2019. So 3 years ago, we knew that this will come, and we started preparing on different fronts. And let me just sort of try to explain what did we do. So we said, along the lines of what we've discussed here, we're going to need not just, front-level workers, the ground-level employees, but also skillful managers and also successful, able, capable people to work in hospitality and to cover a range of important functions. So we approached it with several angles, combining formal and informal education. On the side of formal education, we said that, if we want our country to be led by successful, smart individuals, we need to give them proper education. So now we already managed to certify 2 of our universities in line with the UNWTO TED-Qual certification, which is the golden standard in tourism education. And we've covered that front of highly skilled and highly educated people by providing them the sort of means that they need to have at university level to be ready for the job market. We've done a similar thing in terms of curriculum reform, something that Marianne Engels was mentioning, at the high school level, because the private sector, the industry, was telling us kids come out of a school and we don't really get what we need. We've done some additional research which showed that only one of two kids found job in the tourism sector. Imagine this, that they spent 4 years of their lives studying for something and they eventually, basically the day later, they find job in something different. So we've covered these 2 areas sort of strategically to make sure that the formal education is being addressed and that in the long term we are getting the quality of education that we need that sort of gives us the results. And I want to reflect on something that Sasha has mentioned. One of the 225,000, if I remembered well, cruise workers is my cousin from a small city in Bosnia and Herzegovina. She actually got that job before the pandemic. And before that, she had some basic hospitality skills in a local restaurant. And she received a lot more training once she got that job. She stayed in that training for years. And then she brought all these skills, and she was a valuable asset, again, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in the job market on tourism. So I'm just thinking how all of this is connected, how all of these problems are global, but also the solutions are global, and something that we do in Bosnia potentially impacts Croatia and Slovenia and Germany and other countries where the migration of workers shows, but also the other way around. You know, we get people to visit other countries and to work there, but then they bring all this knowledge back. And one of the things we've done in that respect is to provide on-the-job training in partnership with the key hotels and restaurants throughout the country. We've done this in partnership also with the local chambers of economy, so that once our project, which is a short-term development project, is finished, we have the local institutions who will continue with this, and it's basically offering a standardized training to people in the field so that they are using the examples or the training practices of Marriott and other chains that we have throughout the country for the benefit of training of the entire workforce. And then I'll end with this. A final step that we took was to also offer online training solutions for quick and easy trainings that are maybe 15 minutes or a couple of hours. So we've developed an online training platform called Tourism Academy, and it's been a huge success. We were afraid how much it will be picked up by the workforce, because if you think of workers in hospitality, you wouldn't expect them to jump on an online training course. But we've done this sort of through advertising to general population using social media, but also we've done it in partnership with tourism boards, hotels, restaurants, and other partners in the real sector to basically make sure that those who are willing to take some of this education have a resource to do so. And I'll reflect on 2 examples just to sort of make it real. So we've had some excellent dinners, and I want to thank the hosts for being such great hosts. But in tourism, one of the main concerns is food safety. And given the changes in workforce, you can keep the chefs, but the sous chefs and then all the support staff, there's a high mobility of workers, and it's really difficult for the industry to cope with this. So you have to resort not only to direct training on the job, but also, if possible, provide some online training so that you can give a new employee, when he has some time off in the kitchen, a task to complete a course that takes maybe 3 hours, just to sort of remind him of all the key things. Put the mayonnaise back to the fridge. These kind of small things that can eventually, if not handled properly, result in food poisoning and have such a terrible impact on the entire sector, not just a single institution. So through a range of things, we've tried to cover different aspects. There's also a lot of direct training that we are providing, but eventually in workforce, it's all about capacity building and making sure you build partnerships throughout the sector, because one thing that Isabel said, we have to stop competing and we have to start cooperating on these fronts This is not a single entity problem. This is a common problem, not just for one country, but for the entire globe. So we have to find solutions that work for everyone.
What about the issue of image, of working in the tourism industry? What's the image like in Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Not any better than throughout the world. So we've discussed it a bit. If you talk about high school kids or kids like my son was entering high school this fall, it was nowhere on his list to consider unemployment in hospitality industry. That's just the fact. So we've tried working with some of the travel bloggers and influencers in the tourism sector to show a different side of tourism. Yes, sometimes it is long hours and sometimes it is hard work and sometimes it's not the best pay. But yes, look at all of us working in the tourism sector being in Seville today. So there's a fun side to it, and you have to be able to see it. When my cousin got this job, I was so jealous because as a kid, my dream was to travel the world, and there she was, like making huge leaps compared to what I've accomplished because she was all over the world and she kept sending photos and telling me about all these wonderful countries that she visited. And yes, she did complain about the long hours and about not being able to leave the ship every time she wants to because she's a Bosnian, she doesn't have the visa for all the countries. And it all fits into a global perspective and global problems, so we have to work on improving the image of the sector, and there are many channels that we can use, but we have to make an effort.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, that blogger, the video blogger, did it work? I mean, were people excited by what he or she was saying?
I mean, on a Bosnian level, it worked perfectly. He has 100,000 followers, which for Bosnia is huge. Most of his followers are kids, and we had a conference for youth employment in tourism or something. And I texted him asking, I know that he was traveling somewhere, but I wasn't sure if he's able to do something quickly. And he said, no problem, I'm in Japan, I'll do something in the morning before I start my filming. And he did something that was like 2.5 minutes. And it was amazing because he was wearing, something, and he had these additional videos from Japan that were attractive to the kids, but at the same time, he was sending a message to kids that while this is not something he has planned for himself as a career, look where it got him. And he basically encouraged the kids to consider a career in tourism. And it resonated well with the audience at that conference, but also online with the number of views.
I mean, I think this plays a big part. Influencers, that generation, how they think, how they work, social media, all that stuff must come into play. Rika, now, I know that the human side of sustainable tourism is a big concern for you. Do you think, when we talk about sustainability, that we think enough about the human side?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, it is one thing to really speak about how can we get workforce, what can we do to get people. But on the other hand, if you really try to change society and if we want to be more sustainable, it also includes the social responsibility. So it means that there are two faces of the medal. I think one medal side is to see how can we get workforce, but on the other hand, it's also how are the working conditions. And as the working conditions, a lot of times in tourism are anything but ideal. I think we also have to look into that. At ITB is the largest travel trade show worldwide, as you might know, and we really think that it is necessary to have responsibility towards society as a whole. So we really I try as commissioner for CSR really to look into the social side as well, so that we will also face sometimes discussions which are not so easy. So, for instance, we are also founding members of the Roundtable for Human Rights and Tourism, because I also believe that in the future, the new luxury will also be that people, of course, do their yoga and they feel good with themselves, but they will only feel good as a good person if they know that travel is fair. And that the people, the butler, the personal butler who might serve me in the Maldives has a good life. And it's not that he hasn't been home for 2 years, what normally happens if we are not looking away. So, yeah, for me, it's always important not to look away. And there are many things in tourism, and especially if we talk about work in tourism, where we have to look into. I totally agree with you, Valentina. One thing is, of course, child work, child labor in tourism. We have to think about it. We have to address it. How do we address it? I mean, I was member of the board of the Code International against sexual exploitation of children in tourism for a long time. And they work with the local ECPAT offices really to raise awareness. There we are again, to raise awareness, to educate, and to really integrate it into our normal tourism life, so that all the hotels should be talking about it, because it's not the perception in general. It's often, well, that happens in Thailand or somewhere, but it happens everywhere. It happens in Northern Europe, it happens in the US, it happens everywhere. So why does not every hotel have a sign that we report if we see something like that? Why aren't all the hotels sensitized for that subject? Child protection, a big issue. The second thing is gender equality. As you said, there's the glass ceiling still there. So we should talk more about that as well. And also, if we talk about climate change, we all know that women are those who are suffering more, because as they say, climate change is sexist, because women are really suffering more, and especially in developing countries. When the flooding comes and the women in the kitchen have to stand on stones to make breakfast because the house is flooded. And this is happening every day now. So, yeah, one thing is gender, and then the other thing is, of course, cultural diversity. And you also mentioned that we need to integrate people from diverse cultural backgrounds, because we want to sell something to people from a different cultural background. And if I do not see myself reflected in an advertisement or in the promotion, why should I book with you? And I mean, most of the customers now will maybe come from Northern European countries, or I don't know which your source market is, most of the source market. But you have to look into your source market. And if you also try to get American clients, there's so many people of color. Why don't you address them separately? And how can we do that? We really have to have our workforce according to whom you want to address. And this is the same thing for LGBTQ+. You know, if you don't have any gay person or queer person or trans person, and you want to sell your product to somebody of this group, how will people think you're authentical? So your workforce, also people want to feel in a company as an LGBTQ+ person, you want to feel welcomed, and you want to see that reflected also in the office. If it's a huge office, of course, there will be other people, there will be workforce meetings of special groups with special things they want to discuss, but also in smaller offices or in destination management, you need to reflect the customer you want to get in your workforce.
Do you think as well, with certification schemes for sustainability, that the human side is not taken into account enough, that there is an issue there?
There is, but I'm actually trying to speak about it on all the conferences I visit, or at ITB and so on. So, for instance, GSDC, I'm a member of the board of GSDC because I believe that the global, that the GSDC has really the tools which are...
Can you just explain what that is to people who don't know?
Yeah, it's a global sustainable tourism conference, no, not conference, oh my God. council. Oh my God. And they have really the best tools which were developed together with the UNEP and the Rainforest Alliance to give everybody a possibility to become sustainable. Very easygoing tools everybody can use. You don't have to pay for them, and after that you can go for certification wherever you want. But I think these tools are really a guidance in the jungle of tools, because they're really internationally recognized and can be easily used. And lately we have been working on that to include these social factors much more into the whole certification.
Yeah. It's interesting. By the way, any questions, any points you want to make? I know there are people here who are involved in recruitment and employment who have been working to try and improve the situation for the workforce in tourism. So if you are here, I'm thinking of Debbie Flynn, if she's around. Is she there? She's right there. So I'm going to get you to tell us a little bit about your perspective. But before that, I mean, I hate to say this, but there are certain industries where what you're talking about, social inclusion, is actually embedded in their employment policies. In other words, yes, we will make sure we have X% even of women at this level. We'll have X% of gay people working the force, black people, whatever. You know, that whole thing. They actually have ratios. Does that happen in the tourism industry? Do you? Tell me.
I want to come back to this when we talk about GSTC, for example. I mean, at the end of the day, we're working with GSTC on some of our shore excursions to get them basically certified as well. But again, it underlines the point that in tourism, larger companies, larger parts of the tourism sector as such, so if you talk about cruise, if you talk about hotel chains, for example, they are able to do this simply because there are different margins, there's a different setup, there's a different organization behind it as well. If you think about the restaurant around the corner, they don't have the means of educating or do their own education as such. They don't have the means to engage in that way as well. And that's really a problem because there's a lot of these small operators around. And I think sometimes we miss helping these small operators as well to understand these challenges, to have a voice there as well, and help them to make the next turn as such. The bigger operators as such, they're pretty well organized around that already. The smaller operators, they really struggle with this. And this we can see in a lot of the SMEs around today.
Yeah, but I think this is where the local communities, why they are so important. So, and everybody is based in a community, a small tour operator, a restaurant. So check out what's going on in your community. And there are a lot of NGOs also, there are a lot of associations where you can find advice. And I think, the local...
Do you think people are really going to do that? The local restaurant owner, are they going to go, I mean, I'm just being cynical here, are they really going to go and find out about, positive employment policies from their local community?
It depends. If you for some reason are interested in working with the gay community, you need to go and find somebody of the community and ask, because they know how to do it. Or hats, if you want to, if you're a bigger company and you want to have also people of color as your clients, then you have to, or Asians or whatever, Latinos. There are associations also which will help you. There's a Black Travel Alliance. There is also a Latino organization where you really can get, if you want to. But if you're just catering to a little Spanish village, then you don't need to do that, of course. But still, the mindset. And I think we are here to change the mindset a little bit as well.
I mean, Fedja, are you doing social monitoring of your staff?
It's a challenge.
Yeah. Do you want to expand on that? It's a challenge because what?
I mean, as a growing destination, we still need to jump a few steps ahead. And, it starts, the majority of the work is focused on the local client, as we said. So the perception of a client needs to gradually evolve to start understanding that there is more to the crowds than what I'm seeing every day. And that's why I'm saying it's a process, it's a challenge, it's eventually we will get there, but for us it's going to take a few more steps.
Okay. It's worryingly, and I understand it, it is further down the list of priorities. That, unfortunately, is the nature of this, which is wrong, I guess, in the way it is, but that's, you want to say something, Valentin?
Well, I think it's very linked with what Kathy again was saying earlier, that it's about people want to do good, and we can, it's a bit about not giving necessarily the option and making the standard a more equitable outlook, right, on things. I think that sometimes smaller realities, actually, especially if they're community-based, then they would be thinking more directly about the impact that they're having in their own community, more directly engaging and making sure that they're employing locally, contrary to bigger entities. And so there's an opportunity there, actually, because going back to your point on communication, of actually making sure that you communicate. If those things on fair and equitable employment exist, start publishing it. We're seeing it in terms of accessing funds, so that people want to invest and and customers are more likely to actually choose to buy from companies that are actually fair, equitable, and sustainable in their ways. So that applies also to the workforce and to how they give back to the communities where they are sometimes extracting, especially their natural resources. And I think that we have an opportunity of not compartmentalizing things. There's a tendency everywhere to say, oh, we talk about gender, we talk about environment, we talk about diversity. Why not do it all at the same time? We'll do it once and we'll do it well, right? So the fact is that if we are looking at upskilling the workforce, then making sure that it's looking at making jobs greener, so that is more sustainable, but at the same time is more diverse, and looking at all of the opportunities and reporting. So I was talking about policies and strategies earlier. I think the importance on that is just that they're actually implemented, not just on paper, and that there are actions, KPIs, whatever works for whichever entity, that you then track over time and you report on them, so that there are actual commitments, because we know that if we're not hold ourselves to account, it's not going to work. We need some incentives to make sure that works in the first place. And actually there are some tools out there, so even on how to start doing a gender equality and social inclusion assessments, and even especially for the tourism industry. I've seen also the UNWTO has done some tools on also how to create an action plan on that.
Okay, thank you. I do want to we've only got a few minutes left, so sorry, Sasha. I just want to get the perspective from the people in the audience. Debbie, did you want to just give us your perspective, the lady at the back? And sorry, no, right at the back. Could you just explain who you are and your work in this field?
So I'm the managing partner for Finn Partners in the global travel practice, and so it's probably two hats I wear. One is a PR and communications perspective, and you're talking about communications, and I think the one thing that we ensure is critical into how we communicate on behalf of all our clients, who are many, many destinations, hotels and tour operators. So for example, we will always include within press trip itineraries a community experience, so that we make sure that whatever destination the journalists are going to, that we do show off the best of that. And I do think it's very much, we've talked about storytelling a lot in the last couple of days, but it is actually curating and putting out all of those stories so that people can see globally actually how these people are benefiting from working within travel and tourism. I mean, another good example pre-COVID actually was we were working for South Africa Tourism, and we came up with a campaign called My South Africa Guide, and we just actually focused on different people within the community who did all sorts of different things. We created profiles for them, we flew them over to WTM and had them speaking at panels. So I think it's about spreading that from a story perspective is really, really important, and making it actually part of your day-to-day work is mission critical.
And you also are involved in making sure that young people are interested in working in tourism?
Yes, and in fact, what we do as Finn Partners is we have each one of our team will go to a school, and actually we go in at 16 level, not necessarily university level, because I think it's really important that, some people may not want to go to university, but they could still come and work in travel and tourism. So we will go and talk about PR and tourism in schools, and at the same time they can see what apprenticeships, but in the UK, as probably some of you know, the government has changed the travel and tourism apprenticeship going forward. So we're also got quite a big lobby campaign with our client Advantage Travel to try and create apprenticeships to show people actually, you know, in travel and tourism, you can go all the way to the top, and that working in hotels isn't always just about being on reception or cleaning a room. Again, it still goes back to storytelling.
And there are other projects like yours, other companies doing similar sorts of things?
I hope
Would you
so.
say?
I hope so. I hope we're not the only one.
I don't think you're the only one, but yeah, I think you're certainly a pioneer in that world. We are out of time, but any other questions from the floor? Any other points from the floor, quickly? No, I understand. Lunch beckons. I get it. Just very quickly, one sentence. How would you, each of you, improve the situation for the workforce, for recruitment, for image in the tourism industry if you were in charge of the world? Literally one aspect, one thing. I mean, we've touched about it, and we've touched on a couple of things here. But anyway, Marianne Girls, what would you do?
So if I would say one thing, I would say engage, dialogue, partner, particularly with governments. It's very important that everything that you are saying, that you are discussing it also with governments. Governments have the ultimate responsibility to implement laws and regulations, and, you know.
Yeah, governments get involved, laws, making sure that these things are in stone. Yeah.
I would say 1, we're a global industry. 2, we create transferable skills. And number 3, we have to stop talking negative about the industry. That's the key thing.
Very good. Okay.
So creating a more modern framework that links equity and diversity with wider environmental risks, etc., is in the way in which we look at employment opportunities and in the way in which we communicate it and we shape it. So we get more people working and we retain them, and we benefit the communities where we are traveling and investing in.
I would say think about my cousin or your cousin or anybody's cousin, because there are people behind all of this that we are doing. And it's not a paper problem, it's not a theoretical problem. It's affecting lives. I like what you said. We cannot afford to look away. And we see this around us all the time. So just keep this in mind, that it's what we do is affecting people's lives. So let's do our best to help from our side.
Thank you. Yeah, Rika.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's simply we need to cooperate, and we need to be authentic, and we need to be transparent.
Well, thank you all so much. Really illuminating panel. Thank you. And thanks to you as well for sticking around. Now then, we realized yesterday that lunch was a little bit disorganized, but we are now, today, we've realized, today, your lunch is just out here. It's going to be tapas, lovely food, and you're just around here. You don't have to wander around looking for it. Oh, and wine. Really? No, I suppose it is last day. Yeah, wine even. We are in Spain, I suppose. Please be back here by 3:30. Thank you so much for being here.